Angelo, welcome to Beyond. So glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I know this is a kind of return of favor. You had me on your podcast, your show, a few months ago, and of course, with COVID, now we're doing a little bit differently. It was nice to spend time with you in person. But before we jump into the questions I have for you, I wanted to help the audience sort of understand your background, and it's really extensive. So, Angelo is a fractional CMO and has over 25 plus years of business experience in sales, marketing, branding, strategic planning, and market development. His senior level expertise includes developing and directing comprehensive market, product plans, branding, and communication plans, and strategic business planning for a variety of business to business, financial, consumer, medical, packaged goods, general retail, restaurants, and high tech clients. Wow, that's a mouthful, but I'll
It,
tell you, most people I know in marketing, Angelo, they're good in one vertical. Maybe it's medical devices or a vertical they're choosing. You have a unique sort of skill set and experience where you're able to transverse or cross across or basically go across verticals
mhm,
into different businesses, different markets, and still apply the same trade and techniques.
right. Well, that kind of approach and experience came from my years in advertising. As working for advertising agencies and also running my own for many years. We'd get opportunities, and whether it was an alcoholic beverage or a piece of software, if we didn't understand the industry, we'd go learn it. So we're always digging in and utilizing my part of my background, which is market research, to go out and find those insights so we could truly understand the marketplace, the customers, the competitors, the nuances of the needs, wants, motivations, behaviors of the marketplace. So that's really just kind of transcended my career and what I have also now brought to the fractional CMO role.
That's awesome. But as we sort of get into this conversation, I want you to see if you can take the audience back to where it all started for you. I mean, how did you end up where you're at? I mean, what specific steps did you take to get to this point? Did you always know you wanted to get into marketing when you're 18, 19, 20? So sort of take us on that journey, if you don't mind, as to where it started and how you got here.
Sure. Well, around 18 or 19, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to be, but I did have an opportunity to come out to California. So, marketing, communications, a degree, but I was really interested in film. I thought I wanted to be a film director one day in life. And I thought I could certainly translate my skills as a marketer and a creator into the movie industry, if you will. And so I'd actually met the marketing director of Disneyland at the time at spring break. And, I'm a New York boy. And he said to me out here in California, when you graduate, come on out, I'll take care of you. So I did. Well, apparently, I'll take care of you in California was a little bit different than I'll take care of you in New York.
Right.
So I found myself, here in California trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I was very fortunate. My sister had a girlfriend. My sister lived out here, introduced me to him, and he was owner of an ad agency. So that started my route in advertising.
Well, it's really amazing how important connections are, and maybe it's serendipity, but we'll take any way we can get it. So as I look at your career progression, it's really fascinating to me. In 2014, it appears you transitioned from a full-time role to a fractional entrepreneur, I'll call it. And as a fractional CMO, it appears it has afforded you tremendous exposure to a number of industries. So why did you choose to pursue a fractional versus a full-time role as a CMO?
So, throughout my career, I had the opportunity to work both sides of the fence. So working in advertising, I would always think that if I had that client's job, I could do a better job. And so I was given those opportunities. So I jumped from the agency and went client side and found out that, it was a little more difficult maybe than I thought, and certainly put a better understanding in context of what it was like to be a marketing director.
Mm-hmm.
But after a few years, I would find I missed working on multiple accounts versus just one single brand. And that led me back to the agency side. And then through that experience and growth through an agency, then I decided as actually my second time as an entrepreneur, I left the agency and I became a strategic planner to agencies. And I had about 12 different agencies that I worked for about 5 years. And I would do their research and their strategic planning, but I didn't actually go service clients, which I really liked. I didn't have to do that day-to-day stuff anymore. But along the way, that morphed into a full-service advertising agency, which I grew and was fortunate enough to sell. And at the time, they bought my creative partners as well, and they put us into a new agency down here in Irvine called Open Minds, and we were there another 8 years before they decided to move us, and we decided not to move. And so from that standpoint, I decided I'd give client side another shot.
That's awesome. So as we kind of go into some of the brass tacks of marketing, when you think about marketing, messaging flows through a number of channels, certainly, and from social media to radio to brochures to a website, even a podcast, it really is an integrated approach. So how do you make sure that all these elements and channels work together cohesively?
Well, that's interesting. And it's probably one of I'll say the number one places I have to talk to a prospect about or a client. A lot of times when I'm contacted, it's about, hey, we need a website, we need a social campaign, we need a brochure. And my thing is always, we need to go up the chain. We need to get to that 30,000 foot and understand the marketplace, understand the customers, digging into, if you service several verticals, what's important to vertical number one might not be the same thing as important to vertical number two. You have to add in the dynamics of the market in general. You have to add in the competition. So all those kind of mixed together starts to shape how you might message. So instead of starting at message and tactical down, for me, the best approach and the most strategic approach is to take it up and really start gathering all those insights. And that's, I think maybe we've talked about this before, I've kind of focused buckets in brand and plan. In that order is the best way to go, because if you don't understand the market, your customer, their needs, wants, motivations, you really can't message correctly. You'll get some of it, but you won't get, the really targeted stuff that motivates based on whatever their market needs happens to be. A message today, for example, that I might put out even for myself that I put out 2 months ago is not the right message anymore. So I have to understand what my customers are going through, their pain points, and how to address messaging that's relevant to them. And it's about relevancy. If it's not relevant, who cares?
No, exactly. A lot of times you put together marketing plans, not you, but people, and they really don't know what it is they want to achieve, right? So in developing a market strategy, how important it is to know what you want to achieve, what the goal is. Because I think a lot of people are ready, fire, aim, and they really haven't put the analysis into it that's emotionally driven. How important is it to understand what that target you're going after is?
Well, it's extremely important because it really drives everything else. If I know that, I'm a $10 million client today or company today, and I want to be at 20 million in 5 years, you just can't say I want to be 20 million. There has to be a plan. So if we go out 5 years and work backwards and kind of layer that, I spoke to someone actually on my podcast that they talked about it, a strategy tree, where they use the top of the tree as the ultimate goal, and they work down all the different branches that layer down as it got wider and wider at the bottom. All those things fed up to achieving their goal, but they actually started at the top and worked their way down. And that's what I think needs to be done. The way I do it is working backwards, not forwards, because it's easy to say, okay, here's what we're going to do today. But do we really know what today or tomorrow does for the ultimate goal? But if we've planned it backwards, we certainly can follow a more direct path, if you will.
Right. So that leads me to my next question. What is a process that can be used to set clear goals and objectives? I mean, if somebody's sitting down at a Fortune 500 company as a marketing person, where do they start in setting those clear goals and objectives and how they communicate that to senior leadership?
That's always a challenge. A lot of times senior leaders telling you what this particular client that you're talking about in 2014, when I walked in and we talked about what they achieved last year, I thought, okay, here's how we'll get to the next level. And then one day they showed up and said, no, your goals are 4 times this. And it was like, there's no way. There's just no physical way to get to that number. And, so right off the bat, we knew we were going to miss the mark. So understanding those nuances, right? So I won't name the client, but here's a particular client. We sat down, we talked about their growth goals, understanding how we were going to get there. So once we had that plan, the question was, how do we do it? Can we do that through existing customers, that retention, kind of re-signing and maybe getting some upsells from other existing customers that we had? And once we figured that out, we figured out ratios of success. We knew how many proposals they needed to give in order to close X amount. So they had this historical data that we could use as a benchmark. But when all was said and done, we wouldn't get to the number that we needed to get to. We needed to acquire new customers. So then we had to sit down and say, okay, where are those customers? Are they here in our backyard? What's the competition in our backyard? Well, we can't achieve those numbers if we stay in Southern California. So therefore, we need to move out of state. The question is, where do we go? So who are we trying to talk to? Let's map out all the potential clients across the United States. Let's look at the ones that just bought services like ours last year. So they're probably not inclined to buy again. So they might be a kind of a secondary tactic, but there's a whole group of folks that are in the mode to buy this. The buying cycle is about one every 3 years for brand new stuff.
Right.
And so by doing research, we found out that these clients bought last year, so they're not going to be probably buying, or they're going to go back to the resource they bought. In year 3, they're outbidding again. They're looking around. So it created an opportunity gap for us. So when I think about marketing, that's what I like to think about, not about the tactical stuff. That comes way later once we know what that goal is and those steps that we need to take to get there.
Right. You know, and every industry has a different life cycle, right? So you look at, you know, certain industries, maybe medical devices, where you can design and develop a product, go through the FDA process, you bring it onto market, and you may have competition, but it's not like technology, like cell phones or other equally, you know, unique products where technology iterates literally every quarter. So in light of that, if you're a marketing person in a technology company, how frequently do you have to go through this process you just described? It's not like you can just rest your oars for a year or 2 years. It's almost like every quarter you got to be back on market assessment, understanding what the customer wants, what this new, you know, product entry is going to be to the market. How do companies like that think about this process?
Well, and I'm gonna say that the bigger the organizations probably think about it a lot more than the smaller organizations, right? Because it does require bodies and some investment. But in the scheme of things, every organization should be constantly thinking about it, whether they lay a 30-day review or a 90-day review. So one of the programs I talk a lot about is competitive intelligence. I've written about it, I've talked about it, I got an ebook on it. And it's not that difficult to put together a program that constantly feeds information into the company. Then there's analyzing that data. But the more important part is, how do you push it out? I think you mentioned that to the rest of the marketplace, and getting, you know, your senior leadership to understand and act on those behaviors. But if you're not implementing programs like that, and a lot of times when I start, it's like, well, you know, where's your competitive review? 9.9 out of 10, they've not done it. Or my other favorite is, let me see your SWOTs for the last 5 years. And in a lot of cases, they're almost identical. It's like they do them, but they don't do anything with them. And so there's a lot of that when it comes to planning. Is not just the planning aspect, but is working the plan. I was actually really, I'll call the word proud. The other day I was meeting with a client from a couple years ago, and we were in a meeting, and he turned to me and he said, you know, I want you to know we're working your plan. We work it every day. And I went, wow, that's great. Because in my time in the advertising industry, I literally have gone into a client and said, you know, where's your plan? They go, oh, it's right here on my shelf, and they pull it off and blow the dust off it.
Right.
You know, that doesn't do anybody any good.
So do you find a lot of companies invest in data analytics on an ongoing basis to help shape their marketing and sales approach to the markets?
I think more and more. I mean, there's such an inundation of internal data that they should be mining constantly. You know, not even going outside and getting information from the marketplace, but you know, depending on your CRM and depending on your life cycle of your product and your sales, you know, you can look at patterns. You can see what are happening. Customer service. I did some work for a financial company in the credit card processing, and their primary business was, you know, doing credit card processing for retailers. And one of the things we looked at was there a pattern? Were there triggers? Were there conversations? Were there frequencies of touch? that a retailer was giving an indication they were about ready to fire them. And so we put, an analytical program in place to capture that data so we could do predictive modeling to say, if these things happen, you're in trouble, you're about ready to get fired.
Right.
And so that data just existed within the organization, but they weren't doing it and they weren't capturing it correctly.
Right.
They were doing it, but they weren't doing anything with it. And that happens a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to rest in your blessed assurance and assume the strategy you just had a quarter ago is good enough. But in certain businesses, it's not good enough because there's a lot of competition really coming after them. So let me switch gears a little here. Consumers don't trust brands. They don't trust ads, but they do trust people.
Mm-hmm.
What is the role of influence marketing in the strategy of an organization? And how important is it to tap into these influencers to drive your product or brand?
Well, for me, in my opinion, it partially depends on the product and the brand. I mean, certainly from a consumer standpoint, the influencer marketing I think is really critical to bring in and to tap the right ones, number one, but to utilize that as a strategy. I'm a huge believer of integrated marketing. I don't believe there's a silver bullet. So an influencer strategy only is not as effective if you're integrating with other programs. When I have worked in the software and some manufacturing equipment, that cost $1 million, I'm not sure that an influencer program might have been as effective. But so I think part of it is what's your marketplace, what's your product, your service, and do you have the right people to speak on your behalf and do those recommendations and do that influencing. But I think it's definitely a pretty solid strategy, especially on the B2C side.
Yeah, it's funny. In medical devices, influencer marketing is making sure you get the right doctors, the right studies,
Mm-hmm.
the right clinicals, and they can really drive the market, assuming you have the right key opinion leaders to speak into it. Because if they're not respected, nobody's going to listen to them. But a big part of what medical devices leverages, and in pharmaceuticals, I'd argue, are certainly studies, and then people get up in the dais to talk about the outcomes. And these are people that are very highly respected. So I agree that every industry is different in how they view influence marketing, but nonetheless, it's certainly important part of the toolkit in your toolbox, so to speak.
Right, and I think when I think immediately of influencer marketing, I think of the 20-something in their house, showing the product and talking about it, right, or wearing it or whatever it happens to be. But you made a good point when it comes to the B2B side, leveraging market information data, doing your own studies. For about 13 years, I was in the action sports industry, but my customers were the brands. So I had a B2B play, and I would use my data in presentations. And I literally, in my studies did influence purchase decisions by the retailers, because my study said, DC Shoes was number one across all skateboarders in the United States.
Right.
And I remember the very first time, it was probably the second study that I did, and that actually did happen. The next thing you know, there's a giant ad in one of the trade magazines that said, Board Track says DC's number one. And so the study became really important. And so, everybody wanted to get their hands on it, because obviously if they didn't rank or they didn't show in my top 10, I would get challenged all the time, and people would come after me saying, we're the number ones, whatever, skate shoe. And I would say, well, you're really not. Yes, we are. We sell down in Texas and we are the number one. Well, I didn't drill down to, Houston, Texas. And so it's really important that, again, with doing your own research or using industry research to leverage, you certainly can influence the market itself.
So how important is it to understand the difference between listening to your customer versus trying to convince your customer? In other words, in essence, between a sale and a relationship.
Oh, relationship is, for me, that making that emotional connection. There's so much value that goes along with it. It's very difficult. It becomes more difficult for someone, a competitor, to get in between me and my client if I have a strong emotional connection with them, whether it's a consumer product or even a relationship with somebody within a B2B situation, right? They trust me, they know, they depend on me, they could call me at night and I deliver. And I might even be a little higher price, but that doesn't really matter because of the service. So that connection, there's a process that I use called laddering. where we look at the kind of the rational pieces, the functional pieces of let's say a widget, and then we ladder it up to the emotional side. So what for this piece, this one feature in this widget, when you ladder it up, how does it impact the actual purchaser or the user? And so we're going from rational to emotional. So I'm a huge believer that everything needs to translate at some point in time into that emotional connection.
Right, which is probably a reason why sales reps and a lot of organizations make so much money, because they're really trying to drive a relationship commitment, driving a customer that won't leave the organization or the product line, given the competition. So it's interesting the strategies that organizations employ as you see a concerted effort and a symbiotic relationship between sales and marketing, the messaging, and then the relationship and the emotional component.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that people always talked about sales and marketing being at odds, but it really is a symbiotic relationship, and sales will do great, but frankly, sales needs marketing to be that engine of growth. And we'll get it going, but they need to fulfill it and build that relationship beyond what marketing is doing.
Right. And there's a lot of, if you look at the Bay Area and you look at Stanford, you look at UCI, but let's take Stanford for example. There's so many creative ideas coming out of Stanford. There's so many brilliant people that come up with these really unique, cool technologies that are looking for an application. So my next question is, how often do companies create the problem to sell the solution? In other words, they have a cool mousetrap, they have a cool technology, and there's got to be a market for it, and they're trying to find it versus identifying an unmet need and then developing the technology to service that unmet need.
Sure. Well, I think that happens quite a bit, and I have talked about entrepreneurs falling in love with their product and having blinders on to what the real value of it is, right? And so I agree 100%. I've been with companies that have built products and tried to go out and sell them, and most of them were not successful because there was no real need in the marketplace. So again, back to that, if I'm out there doing research and understanding what's going on. So I worked with a household cleaner years ago. And so we wanted to expand the line. So we started looking at hand gels and barbecue cleaners and golf club cleaners and gun cleaners and all these different things. So instead of just saying, we're going to go make all these products, we started doing market testing. We went out into the golf courses and talked to golfers. We went to chili cook-offs and barbecue cook-offs and tried to understand, would people use this to clean their grill? And at the end of the day, about 5 of the products actually went to market and a couple died. Yeah. So the company saved a lot of money. I was working with a telemedicine startup a few years back, and when they came to me, it was like, we would need to do some research, and we got all these features, and we need all this money. We want to understand, what's important to the marketplace. So by the time we finished those 25 features, whatever they were, they only needed 5 to actually launch, which means their need shrunk, their time to market increased. And so if they had waited for years trying to flesh all these features for this product, they probably would have missed the market, number one.
Right.
So a lot of times it becomes speed to market. I mean, how quickly can you get there? And do you, again, have what the market needs and wants versus what you think it needs?
Right. So if you're a Fortune 500 or a startup and you're the CEO of a company, what is the key for a CEO or a company to know if their solution really is in fact a solution?
Go out and test it. We do, from an advertising standpoint, product standpoint, I've worked with companies where I traveled around the country doing focus groups or doing quantitative studies, just trying to understand, how functional the product is. Again, I'll go back to the action sports days. I would work with one of the surfwear companies, and they were launching a shoe, and they weren't in the skate industry, but they were trying to get in the skate industry with their shoe. And I probably spent 2 months traveling around doing nothing but doing focus groups and talking to kids, allowing them to touch and feel the product, talk about the cushions, the tongue size, and all this stuff. And that input drove production on a very select few pieces of product or SKUs that they ended up launching. If they had just rolled it all out, they never would have known. So I'm a big believer in product development, innovation, that you're constantly trying to innovate, but you also have to understand whether that innovation is relevant today and how it would work. I worked with a company, we're trying to develop POS systems. And every time we would go out with what we thought is we had something solid, we'd get out there and find out it was already in the marketplace.
Right.
So they were in a hurry, but that we weren't in that particular case doing the due diligence that I thought we should have. Ultimately, the decision was not to build a product because it was going to cost millions of dollars. It's going to take 3 years. And by the time we got there, we certainly would have been passed by.
Right. So knowing your customer often starts about analyzing relevant data about them. So how can you strategically turn raw data into useful information that you can leverage to allow for a deeper connection with the individuals you were attempting to reach?
Sure. Well, part of it is what kind of research are you utilizing? So if it's qualitative, right, we're really getting opinions. But from a quantitative standpoint, you can look at segmentation. And then segmentation is going to be really important of how you're going to segment the data to make sure you have the right numbers, if you will, and the right people in the survey. So working with a wine brand, one of the things we wanted to look at, for example, is it was a pretty well-known brand, but it lost its luster. It almost became a commodity. So it used to, $16, $18, $19 a bottle. And now you could buy it for $6. You could see it at chili cook-offs. It was everywhere. So one of the things the founder wanted to do was understand why this happened. So we went out and we did a quantitative study among wine drinkers. And we were able to understand by segments of the country the perceptions of the brand and almost track a bit of how it got to where it got. And then once we knew those perceptions, then the next step was to change those perceptions and develop campaigns and things. And we went back out and we tested everything again to determine if we could shift the perceptions of the brand before we ever actually launched it or did anything else in the marketplace. And so we had statistical data that we could project against. We could project against what we thought how consumption would increase. We could project against what we thought we could take the price point up and how long it would take us to get it back up. So all that was through, predictive modeling and things like that became really important. And in that 6 or 8 months that we spent doing all that research, over the next 5 years, the brand actually achieved what it wanted to achieve. But we were measuring every 90 days.
Right, which is critical. So what role or how have you seen artificial intelligence force its way into the marketing equation, right? Because there's a lot of data analytics, and with AI, you can predictably see where markets are going, where they're flowing, bring a lot of data in, what the tastes are, how people are changing, whether it be colors or styles or whatever. What role is data analytics playing in the modern era of marketing?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, again, there's so much information that any organization that's really dealing with lots of data that they can work with or buy. I think it's essential. And the other part of that is machine learning. Is you also just don't want to be doing predictive modeling. You want your program to learn and learn behaviors. So it gets kind of better with age as it starts to learn and process. So that its modeling and its predictability it becomes a lot stronger. So yeah, and it's interesting. One of my close associates is a data scientist, and I remember him telling me, you don't need tons of data to do a lot of this stuff. It just needs to be clean. So I always took that to heart. It isn't about having so much data I don't do with it. It's about having data that I can work with that's clean, that I don't spend millions of dollars cleaning up. So yeah, I think it's really important, but it's an investment, and a lot of times, depending on the size of the company, that kind of investment just is not in their budgets.
Yeah, exactly. So let me switch gears a little bit right now. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's shifting the way that people work and interact and connect. So right now, everybody's experiencing this unprecedented change in our lives. Many of many, for some reason or another, are working from home for the first time, or at least now every day, as compared to what they were doing. What is the key in your mind to working from home to ensure a very productive experience?
Well, it's interesting. I just did a podcast on this. Tips for working at home from a sweatpants pro. I've worked well, some 2000, late 2013, early 14, once again in a home office. I've done it before, and I learned early on what not to do. And so a lot of it is about setting up the right environment and understanding whether it's your kitchen table or it's a home office that you have, that there's certain kind of functionality that you need to do. And what I say is, if you got up every morning and you got dressed and you got in your car and you drove to work and you were at work by 8, do the same thing, right? Follow the same kinds of patterns that you did when you were not, when you were going to the office. Then in time, some of those can be modified, but I think it's really important that you try to have the same kind of behavior and not just assume because I'm home, I don't, have to be at my office in time, or I don't have to, dress or, put on makeup or comb my hair, that kind of stuff. And we've all seen some of that, of course,
Right.
Because people get comfortable, but you're also, again, like we're doing, human interaction. I mean, if I came in and I was, wearing a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and that's not how you knew me, and we're trying to talk to your audience on here, he's a marketing guy and he looks like he just came off the beach.
Right.
So I think it's important that people do that. I think there's a lot of distractions, and I think it's important that you figure out what those are and how to mitigate those. I also think you've got to not make so many trips to the refrigerator, and you've got to get some fresh air, and you got to figure out a way to exercise not only your mind but your body as well.
What do you think is the number one biggest danger from working at home for career professionals?
Could be complacency.
Yeah.
That drive that you have. It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine this morning. He's a sales guy, and he didn't say it, but I heard it. He's literally been up since 7 o'clock this morning, and I was probably his 9th call of the day.
Really?
So that's what he's doing. All he's doing is phone calling. And I did that a couple weeks ago. I made a big list and I just started calling people, leaving a message or talking to them, not trying to sell them anything, but trying to stay connected, letting them know that I'm here. And I've been going to, I belong to a group, sorry, the sun's starting to get me. I belong to a group called Provisors.
Yep.
In some of those cases, I just joined, so now I can't go to the meeting and meet 20 people. I'm online now meeting 45 people, which makes it a little more difficult. But I'm attending those, even though at the end of the day, I might be on for 2 hours and I get 30 seconds. But my face is there. It's important. I get to see other people. I get to, hear people laugh. And again, it's about those relationships and laying those foundations. And I think that is really critical during this time, is you don't isolate yourself and you just don't assume that, there's no reason to call anybody, regardless of what your business is. I think it's really important.
Really, really important. That's sage advice for working at home. And I know there's millions of Americans that are, and maybe in their mind, stuck at home, but there's certainly strategies you can employ to be productive while you're doing it. Let me switch gears again. You're a radio show podcast host of the Business Growth Cafe. Share with the audience what the genesis of that program, that podcast was, and what is the overall objective and sort of drive for that show?
Yeah. So I'm just, I think I just hit 88 or 89. So about 18 months, I think I've been doing it now. I had guested on a show a few years back, and I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. I could do this. And then I didn't. But in the summer of, I guess it was 18, I was on another show. And I thought to myself, this could be a good opportunity to bring business advice, to give back, which one of my early mentors told me, someday you'll have an opportunity to give back. And because I deal with a lot of different folks and I see a need in the marketplace about understanding about growing your business and what are the ups and downs that you're going to face, I decided to roll this out. And that was the kind of the focus of the show, is about, as you grow your business, there's a lot of, if I can move a little bit, there we go. There's a lot of opportunities to get off track and to have issues.
Right.
And so the show really is about giving that business advice. It's about having guests on that have been there, done it, and have them be able to speak to the audience and hopefully give some tidbits about how they can focus and continue to grow their business. So I do it once a week, and I have a variety of guests. Sometimes I'll do highlight shows. Actually, I'm working on one right now where I just interviewed 6 people about being at home, actually. And, what are they doing to stay sane? What are they doing to continue their business? And what have they learned in 4 weeks that they would like to tell other people? And so I've been doing that, and I think that so far I'm enjoying the show, and people seem to like it.
And you do a great job. I enjoy being a guest on your show. And I think, in fact, Business Growth Cafe, make sure you guys check it out. In fact, Angelo, where can they find Business Growth Cafe?
Sure. Actually, on any major podcast platform. So iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, and then at thebusinessgrowthcafe.com or on my personal website, theponzigroup.com.
Fantastic. So Angelo, who's been the most influential person in your life?
Good question. I'm gonna say, I probably wouldn't have said this before, but I'll say it now, is probably my father. And I was home for a family reunion. My father passed like 10 years ago. Both of them, my parents did. But I was home for a family reunion, and I was kind of reminiscing before I actually saw my relatives. And I just had this inspiration about lessons learned from my father. My father was a plumber. He was a first generation Italian. He had to quit school after the 8th grade, go get a job. He was the oldest of 13 and had to help his family. But I remember at one point in time, I was probably about 6 or 7. And if I was a good boy, my parents would allow me to sit in front of the TV with a TV tray and watch television and have dinner. That was a big reward for me being well behaved, which didn't happen a lot. And this particular night, there were no trays. And for the first time, I realized my dad was sitting in another room with all the trays spread around and books everywhere. What I didn't know at the time, he was studying to become a master plumber, which led him to have a career as a plumber, a master plumber. And he had a very successful business and brought me into it at a young age, and had me do things like collect money, again, work as a plumber, just all sorts of different jobs that allowed me to learn a lot of valuable lessons. I didn't know it at the time, but as I got older, and when it came to even promotion, my dad was a big promoter. Even what he did, now I realize what he was doing in all those situations. I realized when he was, donating money or bringing food to people. I mean, I remember him driving up one night and saying, "I got to stop at this house." And he would, got in the back of his truck, pulled out a big basket of food and brought it into the house and came out. And, was like, "Well, why'd you do that?" He goes, "Oh, I'm just helping some friends out." When my dad passed and we were at the funeral, all these people started coming up and talking about what my dad did through his own generosity and giving. And so I was, really taken aback. But now when I think back, because I remember that, I remember about carrying things forward and helping people. I remember about promotion. I remember what it was about dedication when you wanted to quit. And I also remember making business decisions that were not smart, and the failures that happened along the way. So I would say, as I've gotten to this point and looking back, I would say, in hindsight, it was my father.
What is the most important lesson you've learned in life?
Never to give up. That once one foot in front of the next, look at what's in front of you. Quit worrying about what's behind. And I think that people that get sidetracked start looking backwards. We don't plan on going there, so why look?
Exactly.
Right? And understanding that nobody can put you down, nobody can keep you down but yourself. And so I really believe that. People talk about work-life balance all the time. And I remember I was talking to somebody, and he said to me, there's work-life balance, and we all try to achieve it. And there's only one person that is not letting you do that. And it was like, "Who's that? I'm going to go get him," because it's you.
Right.
Only you.
A lot of times they bring you down a memory lane that's not so cool, what does it do? It just firmly plants you in the past, right?
Yep.
And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but it's just a reality of how our minds work. So for future generations listening or that will listen to this in the future, is there any wisdom you would like to pass on to them? What would you want them to know?
That nothing comes easy. It does take hard work. It takes perseverance and passion and persistence. That you always have to have an eye on what you want to accomplish. And again, just like the strategy work, how can I get there? What are the steps that I need to do to get there? You can't just wish it. You can't rub the lamp and think you're going to get those 3 wishes. And so I think that's kind of simply put is understanding what it's going to take to get there and to kind of keep you on the path as straight as possible. And you could just never give up.
Right.
Doesn't mean you have to work 24/7, 7 days a week, because you have to have that balance. But you have to know what you want and lay that plan to get there.
Right. It's great advice. Is there anything we have not covered you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think it's been great. I mean, we had an opportunity to talk about, different things that I do. And again, I appreciate you bringing in the wide spectrum. When people ask me, what kind of industries you service, I say everything from semiconductors to ice cream.
It's A to Z, man. It's like Amazon.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Somebody would say, "Well, how'd you work on an ice cream account?" And I said, "Well, the only thing I ever did was eat ice cream. I never actually worked on one, but I figured out a way because I went out and did research and could make that pitch. Same thing with, vodka account. I worked on one of the big vodka brands, but I was not even a vodka drinker when I started working on it. But now I am. So
yeah, perfect transference.
Yeah.
So can you remind the audience how they can learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, certainly on my website, theponzigroup.com, and LinkedIn, of course. LinkedIn, I'm pretty avid connector on LinkedIn. So, or go to my website and get an email. Shoot me an email is the best place. And of course, I would love new subscribers to my show as well. We're putting out a lot of great content, and that's the easiest way.
Super, Angelo. Thanks for the sage advice and wisdom. Really enjoyed having you on the show. And wish you the best success as you move forward.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
All right. You too.